Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, find out why cell phone hijacking has gotten so much more serious and what new tools have made it that much easier for the bad guys. Plus, find out why TrendJacking is more than just a stupid buzz term, and we load up on a whole batch of audience questions. All that and more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome back to TechSNAP. My name is Chris, and my co-host there on the Skype line is Alan. Hey Alan, welcome back to TechSNAP. How you doing?
I'm good, you?
Good. So we just got through lucky episode number 13, which was our cyber warfare episode. And now in this episode, we're going to go down a route of a new path for hacking in our first couple of news stories. And then after that, we're going to load it up with some Q&A because we had to go light on the Q&A last week. So we thought we'd address that in this episode. And then later in the roundup section, we took some of the most popular stories from our Reddit news page, and we're going to cover those in the roundup section. And then towards the end of the show, I've got some interesting developments with my Bitcoin mining efforts that I'll share with everybody. So it's going to be a pretty good show, right, Alan?
Yes.
Now, before we go, just a couple of details. If you want to contact the show, you can always email us, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or you can check out our awesome TechSNAP Reddit page where you can submit your own links, your own questions, things like that. We always look at those, and a lot of times they make their way into the show, and that's links.techsnap.tv. Right? That's it, right, Alan?
Yep.
Yeah, all right. Now, since we've got a ton of Q&A, we should probably get rolling through these news stories so that way we've got time for all of it. And the first one I liked, it's I don't think we've ever covered a story where a cell phone site hijacking had occurred, and then somebody was able to get information by hijacking the cell system. So this is sort of a story. It's kind of an interesting security hole people are opening themselves up with these new devices that cell phone companies are sharing. Why don't you share the details with us?
Okay, so Vodafone, which is a very popular mobile provider in Europe, makes these devices. One's called a Femtocell and another one's called SureSignal. And basically they're a little router-like appliance that you buy for your house. They're about 160 British pounds or $250, $260 US.
Yeah, they sell them here in the States too.
Yeah,
you can get them here.
Basically you plug it in like a router at your house, and it's basically a cell site repeater, except for it uses your internet connection. So it uses your internet connection to basically make a mini cell site in your house so that you get better signal on all your 3G devices. Which if you have an iPod with 3G and your phone or a couple of phones or whatever, maybe it could be useful.
Yeah, and especially
in your house, I don't know why you're not just using Wi-Fi, but anyway.
Well, yeah, I guess if you have like a family, crew.
I guess if you want phone calls to get through.
Well, and like if you have a couple of a mom and dad and a couple of kids that have all cell service,
but businesses that want to make sure that their customers can get it,
Or a lot of times just inside building walls where the cell signal can't reach. A lot of old buildings often will block signals and things like that. But now these have turned out to be a point of vulnerability, haven't they?
Yeah. So these appliances connect to the Vodafone network via your home internet connection and relay cell phone signals. And so the Hacker's Choice, which is a well-known, well-established hacker group, they developed tools like Hydra, which is named after the multi-headed monster, and it basically allows you to run brute force attacks against different services like SQL or POP3 or SSH and so on.
Yeah, I love it.
Anyway, they've been playing with these devices since they came out in 2009, and they've been working on it for quite a while, but they managed to actually start breaking into them, and they finally decided to release what they had found to everybody. So basically, once they compromised the device, they basically turned it into a full-blown 3G call interception device.
Wow, meaning, so anybody that connects to that.
Yeah, so basically, once they rooted it, that means that if you're within the range of this device, which is about 50 meters or
so your neighbors could potentially be picking it up too. You could be supplying your neighbors some signal.
Right, and basically, if they hop over to your mini cell site and you've hacked the mini cell site, you can listen in on their calls.
Well, and the way cell phone signal connections work, to my understanding, is they're always sort of scanning and connecting and disconnecting and reconnecting.
For the strongest signal.
Yeah.
And so if you're the closest, you're the strongest.
You might even, if you were walking just by that side of your house, you might be on it for the 5 minutes you're on that side of your house. Even it's that kind of connection. Yeah. Wow. So they were able to get some good. They were able to get some goods with this.
Right. And so specifically, the way these Femtocels work is they use your internet connection to and the IPsec to go back to Vodafone and retrieve the private key for the handset that's using the cell site.
Amazing.
Right, because they need that key to be able to do the encrypted call. But if you've compromised the Femtocell, then that key comes right to you.
Yeah. Right.
Right. So it's in the intended mode of operation, the Femtocell would only be used by the person who purchased it, and it would be fine.
Yeah.
And they have a limited range of about 50 meters, so it's not that big a deal. But with a rooted device, an attacker would get the secret key for any Vodafone subscriber. Right? And then once you have that secret key, you can decrypt their phone calls and listen in on them. You'll most likely be able to see their text messages as well. So this could have implications if you're using your cell phone as your second factor authentication,
Holy
like
smokes.
Google does for your email, right? You can set it up to text you an extra token to be able to double secure your Gmail login. But the other thing is, once you have their private key, you can masquerade as their phone. So you can make calls and have them show up on the other person's bill.
Well, if you can masquerade as somebody's phone, then you can a lot of times just get right into their account settings or voicemail and stuff like that, too.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. You can access their voicemail. So you can make calls that come from their phone number and go on their bill, and you can access their voicemail. Like a lot of phone companies, if you're calling from the handset that the number belongs to, don't even prompt you for authentication.
You know what? I could see teenagers totally using this to spy on their parents and just totally see what their parents are up to
and things like that. Well, actually, something like this came up at DEF CON a couple of years ago. They built they had a laptop with a little GSM modem sticking out the side.
Yeah.
And it turned out that I don't know if this has ever been fixed or not, but iPhones and most other common smartphones, when they connect to a cell site, according to the RFC, the standard for cell phones, when they connect to a cell site and it doesn't support encryption, they're supposed to display a big nasty error message to the user saying, "Are you sure you want to connect to this cell site because it doesn't do encryption?"
I believe that was just added in iOS 5, and I don't know about Android.
Right. And so when your phone didn't tell you, it would just connect to this unencrypted node.
Right.
And then they would be able to hear your calls without having to have your encryption key.
Oh, man.
But with this, they get your encryption key.
Oh,
so instead of being able to just tap your phone calls, anyone with one of these that it gets in range of you can forever on pretend to be you at any time.
What a train wreck. What a train wreck. I mean, these things are built to provide service for people who don't have proper service at their area of work.
They don't have good reception, and so they buy this thing to boost their signal.
And they charge you to use it.
Well, yeah, they charge you for the device, and the calls you make still apply your regular, rate that you would pay for using their network.
Even though it's using your internet connection. And then this just sounds like a train wreck of a security architecture.
Yep.
This is sounding bad.
Specifically, the root password on the Vodafone device is newsys.
Oh, there you go. If you got a Vodafone thing, you can get in.
6 letters, all lowercase. And now you have root.
Way to go, guys.
Yeah. I remember when I broke the root password on one of the first generation iPhones, and it was the same idea. It was 5 or 6 characters, lowercase, and it was using DES password hashing.
Do you remember that when the G1...
But then it turned out it didn't matter.
Do you remember that when the G1 Android phone shipped, that it had a blank root password or something, and the terminal was running always in the background? So if you're in a text message and you typed reboot and then enter, it actually sent a reboot command to the terminal and would reboot the phone. You actually were in as root, and it shipped like that by accident.
Well, with iPhones, it turned out that having the root password didn't actually give you anything.
Oh, it's all locked down anyways.
Right, but it was, kind of funny to... the guys that run Hackintosh asked me to brute force the password for them because I had all these servers, because back then nobody knew to use GPUs to do it. And when it finished in 4 seconds, I was a little surprised.
It seems like the onus is now on Vodafone to fix this, to right this wrong. Can they invalidate those keys? Or, where are they at on this?
As far as I can tell, the only way to solve the problem would be to stop offering the service right now, to shut down the service and basically disable all of these Vodafone Femtocell devices.
Oh, which they're totally not going to do. There's
They
no way they'll
might have to, though. Well, if people are applying fraudulent charges to other people's phones, they might not have a choice.
Yeah, you're right. I guess what they'll probably do is see if they can just mitigate the problem by just handling it at a customer service level a few times, and then if it gets worse,
doing something like a firmware update or something.
Yeah.
But they may end up having to recall the devices and issue new ones with different software. But it's just a fundamental flaw is that when you put the device in somebody's hands, they're going to be able to root it no matter what you do. Right?
It doesn't sound like they're stepping up for this. It sounds like they're kind of...
No, they're not at all. And so that's why a lot of people are asking the question, should Vodafone be held liable for not protecting their customers?
You see, that's what I'm kind of getting at. I think so.
Specifically, people are wondering if this had anything to do with that, there's been this big uproar in the UK about hacking into people's voicemail.
Right. I think those were done with more conventional means.
Probably.
Yeah.
But, this opens it up to a huge scale, right? If you take one of these... If you can hide one of these in a backpack and take it into a Starbucks, how many phones can you pick up?
Well, and I think, oh wow, yeah,
right. And you get every one of those keys, and then you just start making phone calls all over the place. Right.
You bring in a MiFi adapter, and then you hook up your Photocell to that, and you just sit there in the start. Ooh, I should get one of these.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems like I don't know about Vodafone, but here's how it works here in the States, say, for example, for AT&T. You spend about $200 for the device, and then there's a monthly fee for it, and it uses your internet connection. And anytime you buy hardware and then you pay a monthly service rate for that, in my mind, that monthly service rate goes towards them keeping things like it's secure and my cell information confidential, my voicemail confidential, all that stuff. I assume that's part of that monthly fee. Otherwise, if they aren't doing those things, what's the monthly fee for? So that way they have the privilege of giving me service on my internet connection?
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, any thoughts on this guy?
And then the last thing was there's a quote from THC asking, who's liable if the brakes on your car malfunction? The driver or the manufacturer or the guy who tells you how insecure your brakes are? Right? They're saying, don't try to come after us for doing this. We're just pointing out that these devices are bad news.
Oh, yeah. No, and good for them. And the fact that they're making it public means that they're not sitting there using it for their own means, likely.
Of course, I wonder how long they've been sitting on it for a while.
Yeah. You got to wonder,
But if I have one of these, I would not tell people about it either.
It's a scary thing to come across because these companies will come after you. I mean, we saw it with Sony. And then, but...
And that's why they have this quote in there. It's like, we're just telling you and everybody else that you have to watch out for this. Because that's the other thing. I don't know THC that well. I don't know their disclosure policy. But maybe the reason they've been sitting on this so long is they were giving Vodafone a chance to fix it before they announced it.
Yeah.
And then they didn't, right?
And then they didn't. So then all right, well, we just got to put it out.
Well, we're going to have to put this out there. And maybe that'll force them to do it.
That's probably what it could be, because I know that happens quite a bit. Just following the security disclosure alerts and stuff like that, a lot of times you'll see indications that, this was found.
They've been sitting on this for a while to give everybody a chance to fix it and get patched up.
In fact, they'll even sometimes do a multi-vendor thing where if somebody finds something, they go to an organization, and that organization orchestrates, say if it's a bug in Apache, a lot of times you'll see one central organization coordinate with Red Hat and coordinate with Novell and coordinate with Canonical,
ESD and everything. Yeah.
Exactly. So and then so it's not like they're keeping it secret, but they're kind of giving the good guys a heads up.
And then so there's a patch that's out there and people have had a chance to use it before the exploit comes out.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this prevents the whole 0-day issue that the Stuxnet uses and so on.
Right. Yeah. Should we move on to an interesting Facebook
I included a link at the end there to a wiki THC has that has a bunch of diagrams of how the devices work and so on.
Oh, cool. I'll check that out after the show. I didn't even know. That's pretty neat. Yep. All right. So now the next story. Now, I think this is our last news story. Then we're going to jump into the Q&A. Google Plus is just exploding, it seems. And, of course, always a great opportunity for scammers to take advantage of woeful Facebook people who want to get in on the new hotness. So, Alan, you came across this news story, and the timing's perfect with Google Plus exploding and Facebook reacting with their apps now. So there's a new app for Facebook that is kind of it's lulling people into thinking it's a Google invite system, but it just turns out to be a complete scam.
Yeah. So basically, it advertises itself as if you install our app or whatever, you'll be able to invite 50 of your friends to join Google+.
Aha.
Basically, it's what's being deemed TrendJacking. Right?
TrendJacking?
Looking for the current trend and then hijacking it and trying to use it to exploit stuff. So
I believe politicians figured that one out long before the internet.
Yeah. So when you visit the unofficial page for Google Plus on Facebook, right? It does say unofficial fan page, but it looks fairly legitimate.
Googly.
It's got the Google logos on it and everything. You're invited. So once you go to the page, it asks you if you want to install this third-party app, and then it lists what kind of access it will have to your Facebook account.
Wow.
As with every app permission request that you see on Facebook. The thing is, it's asking for some very specific things.
Sure is.
So although it's a common requirement for basically every app on Facebook has one of these screens, not everyone is the same. But specifically, this one wants the ability to post on your wall and to access your data at any time. Some apps will only have access to your data while you're using the app, but this one wants to have access to all of your data at any time.
Wow. And the app is called Google Plus Direct Access, right? Is that looks like the name is here? So if you guys have seen this out there, be sure you let people know, because this seems like this one could go viral on Facebook.
Once it has access to right on your wall, it sends its spam message out on your wall so that every one of your friends see it. Telling them they should sign up, right?
Right.
And then it requests access to all of your personal data. After that, then it asks you to like the application to make it more popular. So it'll show up on right? So it'll show up on it's got like 80,000 likes on it, and it'll show up as, being trending, as popular, right?
Wow.
And then it asks you specifically to invite all of your friends to the application.
This is pretty clever, actually.
That's a very common thing on Facebook, especially with the games.
Yep.
All those games, it's like, invite your friends, and if they sign up, we'll give you this bonus.
It's it's just how the users expect the whole Facebook app system to work, so it's common behavior, even though it's so spammy and so perfect for this kind of thing.
Exactly. So then you invite all your friends. Now your friends see the invite and they accept it, thinking that, well, you're sending this to me, so you probably already checked it out, and you're on Google Plus now, and I want to be on too, right?
I trust my friend, so if my friend says it's a good thing, it's like opening attachments to the nth degree.
Yeah.
It's peer pressure attachment opening is what it is.
Yeah. So your friends assume it's legitimate because you pass it on to them. It's not just something they saw.
Right.
It's not just on your wall. You invited them, which in this case, it actually required you to actually do it. But anyway, so now this application has managed to spread wildly among everybody's social networks, right, as it spreads. And it has complete access to your Facebook profile, so it can scrape your personal information. And because of that at any time access method, it can keep getting more information. And they can keep coming back and getting more stuff.
And
you also gave it access to write to your wall and send you email. So now that this application's been installed and has access to your profile, they can use it to promote their other fake apps without your permission.
So traditionally,
blanket permission.
A Facebook application only gets access to your information that one time.
Or while you're running the app.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And basically, there's a bunch of different levels they can request.
But the anytime is just anytime they want to execute a job on using your information.
Yeah, basically, it gives them a key to your account. But anyway, specifically, they'll be able to use this now to promote other fake apps. So, a couple days from now, all these people that installed it, they have wall posts and messages to all their friends saying, hey, install this app that, gets rid of Facebook viruses or something, right? So again, another crapware.
Yep.
And it'll spread automatically because they already have permission from all the people that sign up for this fake Google Plus thing. Right? And so it just keeps multiplying. As they basically, once they get, a couple of these different apps spread across different social spheres, they just have this huge botnet of Facebook accounts.
The viral effect.
Yeah.
Wow. You have a link in the show notes on how to clean up if you've gotten this, though, right?
Yes.
Did I glean that?
Sophos has a video in there showing you how to remove the application from your Facebook.
Yeah. Which looks like probably if you see, or maybe you could just go grab that link and pass it along if you see somebody posting that crap. Because it's likely, even if you don't get caught, you probably will eventually see somebody get caught.
I see these messages from my cousins and my aunts all the time. I'm like, what are you people doing? It's like, how do you not know that's a scam?
I know.
It's like, just reading it, you can tell it's a scam.
Yep.
So specifically, you need to watch what applications you're allowing access to your profile. And specifically, when that screen pops up, look at what rights they're requesting. Right? Does that game really need to access your data at any time?
Yep. The same thing.
Rather, it'd only be able to do that while you're playing the game. And do you trust it with access to post to your wall?
Yes, especially that. Especially
a lot of games like to really spam your wall, like every time you get a cow in Farmville or whatever.
It would be nice if Facebook would add sort of like a granular level allow deny. So because right now it's just a global, okay, I'll take it, or no thanks.
Right, but in most cases the application wouldn't work properly if it didn't have that access, so it's either the whole app or not.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And that's how the apps kind of have you by the short hairs there.
Makes sense. That makes sense.
Because they're like, our app doesn't work if you don't give us this access.
I dig what you're saying. All right, any other thoughts on this guy?
Nope. That's
all right. Well, you know what that means, Alan. It's time to move into the TechSNAP feedback. All right, it is time for the TechSNAP feedback question. Again, that email address is techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. And the first question this week, Alan, comes in from Peter. And actually, I'm really glad you're answering this one, because I've seen this one kind of one along these lines come across the inbox a couple of times now.
Yes.
He says, while investigating different data centers to how our application, one of them mentioned that we should be using physical servers to host our database. So he's obviously going through that process where, okay, we've got to take in this new application now, time to analyze its requirements. And one of them on that checklist says, we recommend you don't virtualize. We recommend you go on a physical box. He says, is this true? Is this really a scenario I should be worried about if I'm hosting a large database? Do I need to avoid virtualization?
Right. So by the sounds of it, they're asking the data centers for quotes on big virtualization systems, and data centers like, well, if you're doing a giant database, you probably don't want to virtualize that. And so there's a number of reasons why a physical server is better, especially for a database. And the first one is just pure I/O, right? Writing to the disks. When you virtualize that, even when you're doing, the fancy ones with the iSCSI or whatever, it's still not as fast as a real hard drive.
There's just some overhead.
You're emulating a real hard drive and then translating those commands down to the real hard drive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just never quite as good. So in virtualization, there's always some level of overhead when accessing the physical storage medium. So when you can do that natively instead, it can make a big difference. So especially when databases are really sensitive to I/O now, and if you're going to use like an SSD to get your random access times down, if you then add this layer of overhead to virtualization that's going to slow it down, you just wasted your advantage.
What about like Bomber's mentioning how Facebook doesn't use virtualization? They use I think a flat file database system, no, there's just a story they use MySQL. It's Google that uses a flat file database system across thousands and thousands of servers. But what about virtual servers with like tons of RAM, where instead of using disk, you allocate memory to the VM? I guess you're still even then you're translating. You
could use that RAM directly instead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So for large I/O operations, you generally want to avoid a VMware box.
Now, basically, virtualization has overhead on everything. Yeah. Even if you're using hardware virtualization, you have overhead on your CPU cycle.
But the reality is,
like, it used to be, but
80% of server workloads out there, of the average server workload, can be done on virtualization. File services, domain name services, all those kinds of things, really no problem.
And even some databases. Right? Even low and medium performance databases are fine.
Totally.
But if you're spending a lot of money on hardware to get this database to be as good as it can be, then you're going to want dedicated hardware for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Because on top of the overhead you get on the CPU cycles, there's overhead on your disk access, which is a problem, but also network access.
But you might have, if you had a bunch of web servers in front of that database, they could all be virtualized.
Yes, those can all be virtualized.
Very often. So it just kind of depends on how you have to build it.
Yeah, so it's generally considered best practice to keep your database on physical hardware. It doesn't mean you can't virtualize it, but if you're really worried about performance, you probably shouldn't.
Yep. Yeah, I believe even still to this day, Microsoft Exchange recommends you don't use virtualization. Yep. Even though they sell Hyper-V on their own server product. They still recommend you put it on physical. I believe that might have changed as of 2010, but it was like that for a long time.
Possibly. But also Exchange requires a ridiculous amount of memory.
Yeah. Oh boy. Are you ready for the next one, or any other thoughts on that guy?
Sure.
All right. Next one it is. The next one comes in from Nikki, and here we go. It says the recent usage-based billing legal battles in Canada, which, oh man, I followed some of those. Like with the smaller ISPs, are proposing to use a 95th percentile billing. What is 95th percentile billing?
Right. So a little bit of background on this. The incumbent telco carrier started introducing usage-based billing. So basically, when you had an internet package from them, it was going to be you get so many gigabytes, and if you go over, you pay this ridiculous rate of like $2 a gigabyte. And
Wow.
this caused a lot of customers to switch over to some of the independent ISPs.
Yeah.
Because of the way the telco network works in Canada, the last mile to your house is still owned by Bell.
But same here.
The government legislated that Bell has to sell wholesale access to that to allow the smaller ISPs to exist. But then Bell decided they were going to impose that usage-based billing, a per gigabyte charge, to the smaller ISPs, but at a rate only barely discounted from the rate they charge their own customers, so 90% of the rate, so that all the small ISPs would basically have no way to make their package look more attractive than the Bell one.
That sounds like what Verizon's done here in Washington.
Yeah. And there was a huge uproar about this, and the government struck it down and said, no, you can't do that. So Bell's counterproposal was to do aggregate usage billing. So the smaller ISPs would pay Bell a fixed rate for 200 terabytes of bandwidth, and then it's like 30 cents for every gigabyte they go over that. And this would allow them to aggregate that volume between all their customers instead of paying per customer.
So then they would essentially be forced into implementing their own usage-based pricing. So
Yes.
that way, that sucks.
It's not as bad, but yeah, it still sucks. So what the small ISPs counter-proposed was 95th percentile billing. And specifically, the reason for this is Bell's claim to why they had to do this was that during peak times, their network is overused, right? Too much congestion. But their solution of charging people for the gigabytes they use doesn't really solve that. Because people watching YouTube are not going to go do that in the middle of the night, right?
Right.
It's still going to happen at peak time. So all they're going to do is cause people to not use the internet, which is horrible for the economy.
And you have to look at the fact that all of these services are going towards streaming.
Yes.
And it's just going to put look at us. We're
major-
live streaming right now, and then these videos are for download. They're trying to sort of, I would think, regulate that without actually having regulation.
Bell Canada owns about a third of the TV stations in Canada. I wonder why they want to kill things like Netflix.
Yep, funny how that works, huh? Well, Comcast down here owns NBC, and one of the number one ISPs that goes to Jupiter Broadcasting of our U.S. visitors is on Comcast.
Yep.
So, we are part of the Comcast cap now that people have to kind of calculate in. And that's why one reason we make audio versions available of everything we do. And we make the iPod version, when it works even on Android devices too, it's just a mobile version. We make it as small as possible. I hear from people in Australia that have it even worse, that really have to pick and choose what they can download. It's like they have to actively think about what they're going to do every time they sit down at the computer.
I had the same problem. I had to start paying 3 times as much for my internet connection in order to get more bandwidth to be able to stream better quality for the show, but also to be able to download enough.
I just can't believe it's happening now. I
know.
It seems like we're so past this. Like this was a problem of the 90s. I don't know. That's what it seems like. Yeah.
So basically, the proposed solution, 95th percentile billing, has existed since the 90s, and it's how pretty much every carrier grade and data center grade connection is billed. Rather than billing you for the number of gigabytes that you use, it bills you for your peak usage. So the concept's simple. Rather than charging for the amount of bandwidth that you use, like the total number of gigabytes you send across the line in the month, the billing is based on your peak usage. So it's the amount of data you send back and forth across the connection is measured every 5 minutes. Basically, every router that's ever existed counts every bit as it goes through. And basically, by looking at that counter every 5 minutes and subtracting the one right now from the one 5 minutes ago, you can figure out how much data was transferred in the last 5 minutes, right? And you write all these numbers down. And
it's a massive logging system they must have.
Yeah. Well, eventually you use something like a round-robin database where as the data gets older, you average it out.
Alan, can I just throw a conspiracy in your face for a second?
Yep.
Do you think the timing of the implementation of this kind of usage-based billing must follow an implementation of a technology to track us, because this just must be one of the components of tracking everything we do provides them. I sincerely doubt they rolled out some multi-million-dollar system that only tells them the amount of transfer we're doing.
Right.
This seems like just a perk of some sort of monitoring system. This really feels kind of shady.
Right, but like I said, the routers count every bit that goes through. So cable companies have always been able to tell how much bandwidth you use because they just break it down by MAC address. Right? It's just a statistic that routers have always been able to do.
I hope that's how they're getting it, because that would be the least. I mean, your MAC address is still your MAC address, but it'd be the least intrusive.
Yeah, it's tied to your account.
I hope it's not part of an overall monitoring system.
Most ISPs probably are monitoring what type of traffic you're sending back and forth. Right? Because, for example, the one that started all this, Bell Canada, they throttle BitTorrent to 32 kilobytes per second between the hours of like 4 p.m. and 2 a.m.
Wow, that sucks. Yeah. I hope they don't do that here in the States, although I know they're trying. Should we move on to our last question? Because we got one more question before the roundup.
I haven't actually answered the question yet.
Oh, you're not done? Oh, I thought we covered it. I'm sorry.
So
go ahead.
Anyway, it measures the amount of transfer every 5 minutes and determines the average speed. Then, as the name suggests, what you do is you take the 95th percentile of that. Mm-hmm. So they sort the speed measured every 5 minutes for the whole month, and you take off the top 5%. You just delete those numbers. And the next number left, the highest measurement, is the 95th percentile. Right? And so then you pay for that much bandwidth.
Right.
So if they measure it and it turns out that you used your 95th percentile was 7 megabits, then you pay for whatever the rate is for 1 megabit times 7.
So you just kind of have to self-meter, or do they provide like some sort of tool so you know if you're racking up the bill? Well,
with the data center type connection, yeah, you get like an MRTG graph.
Okay.
Well, again, this isn't for the home users.
Oh, right. They're going to pass that along.
So the wholesale ISPs will have one 95th percentile account with the incumbent. Mm-hmm. And so the way this works is you end up paying for not exactly the highest amount you ever used, but on average, most of your data transfer is below this speed, so you have to pay us for this speed. Right? Okay. So you might argue that it's going to end up being more. I'm paying for more than I actually used. But what you're paying for there is the amount of capacity your ISP has to have to be able to service all of your requests across the month.
Right. So you're essentially paying for the availability to service your customers at a certain guaranteed level.
And again, you had that small grace. The top 5% is taken off. So you're getting that amount for free. Like the 5% of a month is about 36 hours. So basically you get the busiest 1 hour for free. But then basically everything after that 1 hour, the peak of that day is eventually what you end up paying for.
But the thing is the peak, like say at 5 to 6 p.m., could be so much higher than the lull, say at 3 a.m. or 8 a.m.
But that's the advantage and the disadvantage of the system. But, if that peak lasts more than an hour, which it does, then you end up paying for it anyway.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Right.
So this allows the ISPs to, the actual carriers to budget for how much capacity they're going to need, because they're charging you for basically how much of your capacity they have to be able to guarantee to keep servicing your bandwidth.
Is this in effect now, or is it going into effect?
This is how all my servers run on this type of a billing agreement, and pretty much every carrier grade connection ever has run on this agreement.
But this is going to be extended down to these indie ISPs.
The small ISPs are proposing that they use this, so they pay for the peak usage.
Oh, okay.
Where Bell wants to charge them for the total number of gigabytes.
Okay, I see.
Your whole justification for this is that you don't have enough bandwidth at peak time.
Right.
So why are you charging me for the bandwidth that's used at 4 a.m?
Yeah. Yeah, because that in your argument is not your expensive bandwidth. In their argument, that's
exactly.
They're using their
so the normal contract for this type of a thing, like what I have, would come in and say, you have something like a 5 megabit per second commitment with 100 megabit burstable. So what that means is you have a full 100 megabit connection, and you're guaranteeing that you'll pay the per megabit price for 5 megabits.
Right.
And then there's an overage price. So then over the month, you get your 95th percentile. If it's under 5 megabits, you just pay for the 5 at the price that you have in your contract. If you go over that, you pay for the 5 at that price, and then the overage at a higher price. Right? And that higher price is the penalty for basically you being outside of what they've budgeted for you to use.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of get screwed for success in some ways.
Yeah.
But at the same rate, if you
being
have...
successful, you should be making more money.
Exactly. If you have more traffic, hopefully you have more money so you can pay for the higher bandwidth cost. Now, in my scenario...
And if you have if you commit to a higher level, you get a cheaper price. But that with the commitment, you have to pay that price if you use less.
I know one time we implemented a data center-based backup system for clients, and boy, did we go over our agreed upon base rate for that month. We had like another $1,200 bandwidth bill on top of our regular bandwidth bill. It was pretty expensive.
Now, if you're doing remote backup like that, if you speed limit it so that it stays under a certain level, you can do the same amount of volume for less money.
Which is exactly kind of what we did. Is we rated it essentially, and eventually just kind of ponied up for more bandwidth because we had to. And it was because we could afford to because the backup service was taking off.
Exactly.
So it kind of works, and it'll be interesting to see where that ends up though. Reflecting for as this gets wherever this ends up for the indie ISPs, it's going to be interesting to see what the end result is for the customers. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Exactly.
Next question time.
Yes.
All right, let's move on to our last question before the roundup section. And this one comes in from Justin. And he says, and this is a question that, this is a perfect question because I've been wondering the same thing. What would be the weakness of using GPG to encrypt my files before storing them in the cloud?
Yeah.
What would be wrong with that?
Nothing. It's just there's a bunch of things that make it harder or, annoying. The first thing is key security, right? You have to keep your GPG keys safe because if somebody else gets them, then they can access your data that's in the cloud and decrypt it, right?
Yep.
The other thing is key management. You have to have access to that key wherever you are, right? With Dropbox or some similar service, if there's a client for your phone, then you can type in your password on your phone and get access to that file you need right now. If you're using a GPG key, unless you keep that key on your phone, then you don't have access to your encrypted data, right? You can download the encrypted data, but you can't decrypt it. But do you really want to carry that key around on your phone? Because is your phone secure enough to store that key?
Right.
Right?
It's a conundrum.
And then the other thing is if your key is lost or destroyed, it's gone, right? You can't reset your key like you can your password. Or in this case, you're also comparing it to just doing something like AES encryption with a password, like TrueCrypt, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where that's just a password you can remember. Because that you would have with you everywhere, whereas a key, you physically have to have it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's like just data, but it's too long to memorize.
Yeah, but something like a TrueCrypt password volume key, hopefully come up with a phrase or something that sticks in your brain.
Right, and then you can access it on any computer you're on. Whereas if it's a key, you have to securely back that up in a bunch of places, and you have to be able to access that whenever you might need to access that data that's encrypted.
Mm-hmm.
So it can become a bit of a pain, especially if you use a lot of different computers.
Yes.
The other thing is key lifecycle. How often should you change that key that you're using in case it does eventually get broken? And also when you generate the key, if you started with a key a couple of years ago, at what point is the bit strength of that key not good enough and you need a stronger key? And the other thing is, how many different keys do you want to use? Are you using multiple cloud services? Do you want a different key for each one? Do you want different keys for different files or different levels of security on the files? Right? Because that way, if one of your keys is compromised, less of your data is lost or exposed. But then the more keys you have, the more trouble you have with key security and key management.
Right.
Right? You got to keep all these keys on every computer. It get, unwieldy.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be a problem. And then of course, if you lose track of even one of them, you could lose that area of information. Yeah, so.
Yep. And the other thing is speed. Asymmetric encryption, like GPG, is a lot slower than symmetric encryption, like AES. Especially now that the new Intel i7 processors have a special instruction set for AES that makes it about 8 times faster.
Oh.
Like an older i7 that doesn't have the AES instruction can do about 1 gigabyte per second of encryption.
Oh.
Or gigabit per second of AES encryption. At 256-bit. The new Sandy Bridge i7s do about 8 gigabits per second.
Wow.
That's a big jump just from the instruction set.
That's a feature in Sandy Bridge.
Yeah.
Of that architecture, yeah.
I think even like the i7 Extremes have it, but basically you can check on the Intel website for your different processors and you'll see there's like an AES instruction set. and it's like an on or off feature on different processors. And so basically with that, it's a lot faster.
What about the angle, though? Like, now it's more applicable to like storage like Dropbox, but part of the problem with keeping things in encrypted volumes or files is you lose incremental change syncing.
Right. Yeah, you can't sync any kind of incremental change.
So it's just the whole file, and every time you update the volume, which is something to kind of consider, because if it's that's another reason I actually kind of go the route you were talking about, Alan, have multiple things with different encryption keys and different volumes, because maybe you don't want to have like you go update a document, you have to update this entire encrypted volume. Maybe you just want to update that section.
If you that was the disadvantage of doing using something like GPG with Dropbox, is that basically unless you encrypt every single file separately, then you end up having to re-upload your entire encrypted archive every time you change one file.
Now, one service like the one I've used before, Jungle Disk, which uses S3 as the backend storage, will do client-side encryption and then stores it.
So it has basically what it does is something like this, where you use something like GPG to encrypt a key for AES, right?
Yep.
So you have a GPG key or something like that that's stored in your Jungle Disk client, and that key encrypts the key for a regular, like an AES passphrase, except for really long and random. And basically, so you get the speed of AES on your actual encryption, and then you just use GPG to encrypt the password for that encryption. So you get the strength of GPG protecting the password of AES, and then you get AES for the speed of the encryption.
And it uses...
Of course, AES technically would be more susceptible to brute forcing the key, but 256-bit is still plenty strong.
And you can, in Jungle Disk, you can have it act as a full backup, or you can have it, pretend like it's a local mapped network drive on your computer, right, which is really kind of nice. And you can have multiple people mount that drive, so it can be kind of a collaborative working environment.
It is a bit expensive because of the backend S3 is kind of expensive.
Yeah, there's like a 15 cents per gigabyte charge, plus a monthly fee.
And then another 15 cents per gigabyte for bandwidth to get it in and out of S3, and that's just the charges that Amazon charges Jungle Disk, not even talking about what you end up paying Jungle Disk.
So it's, I probably right now, I am a current Jungle Disk customer, but I don't use it extensively. I probably have like 500, I don't know, I pay about $7 a month right now, total.
Yeah.
And it's just nice, convenient, super fast encrypted storage, but you're right, if you used it like as heavily as I use Dropbox for all of our video work, I'd be paying out the butt. It'd be crazy.
Yeah, and part of that is because they're backed by Amazon, they're paying the Amazon rates, which are, well, very nice and scalable. They are kind of expensive.
Jungle Disk is now owned by Rackspace, and uploads are free. So
I wonder if they're switching over to the Rackspace cloud.
Well, they're owned by Rackspace now. So they probably are.
But originally it was S3 backed with Amazon, but they might switch over to the Rackspace
They're
cloud.
offering both. They offer both at this
But
point.
actually, the Rackspace cloud charges more money for storage.
Oh.
Or bandwidth out of the Rackspace cloud is like 22 cents a gig instead of 15 cents.
So even the upload being free probably might just be a wash. Something to look at, though. Yep. Might be something. Are you ready to move on to the roundup, Alan?
Sure.
All right, I'll cover this first story because I know a few friends out there who watch the show might be interested in this.
I was excited by it.
Were you? Yeah, okay. If you are a Windows user who has had to administer a Linux or a Unix box over SSH before, you've probably used PuTTY before, and after 4 years, a new update to PuTTY is out for Windows. And I don't know. I know they have a Linux version, but I think it's pretty far behind. So go check that out.
It's just as up to date.
Is it? I don't know why you need it on Linux so much, but
I just got so used to the save profiles that I actually run the PuTTY version even on my BSD machines because
I can see that.
I have all my settings in a convenient.
If I did that, I could see. If I used the PuTTY profiles, I could see using that. All right, so you want to take the next story in the roundup?
Cool thing is that it has a bunch of Windows 7 integration features. So now when you have a PuTTY window open,
the new PuTTY?
It has that quick list. So when you right-click on the window, you can see recent sessions and things like that. It's quite handy.
It
has the Windows 7 fancy resizing and stuff.
The snap stuff and whatever.
Yeah.
All right. So next roundup story is this spinning heat exchanger. Do you want to cover this one?
Yeah. It's this. Basically, instead of a regular heatsink with fins and then a fan on it, it's a heatsink where the fins spin.
Yeah, the top of the heatsink itself actually spins and spins and spins. I can't believe we never thought of this before.
It kind of reminds me of the idea with the typical heatsink, and when you put the fan on it, the problem is that the very center of the CPU is under the motor of the fan, and there's no air straight down.
Yeah.
And this is why on my old computer I used to have a Cooler Master Aero, and it was it looked like a water wheel.
Oh yeah.
And so it would cover the entire CPU instead of missing the middle, like a regular fan.
Yep.
But this apparently is even more efficient.
Yeah, it looks like it actually...
You're forcing the air through the fins better.
And the air comes in and enters the spinning unit in the middle, right on top of where the CPU would be underneath.
Yeah.
And so...
so it gets more air to actually get the temperature off the CPU better.
The early test unit looks like it's been extremely successful.
Apparently.
So, and it has they also say it uses 7% electricity than a more traditional CPU fan. So that's kind of neat. All right, I'll take the next story in the roundup. So this is kind of funny happening events. It's two stories. I'll cover them back to back because they're kind of related. There was a artist hacker guy who hacked a bunch of Apple computers and set them up to take pictures of people, and I included a link to the screenshot slideshow.
Yeah, specifically, he hacked computers at the Apple stores.
Yeah, so they're using that like their built-in eyesight camera.
And basically taking pictures of people looking at Macs at an Apple store.
Yeah, and so now, he's getting investigated by the Secret Service over that.
The Secret Service does almost all computer crimes.
I had no idea that it was like that level. I figured maybe FBI, sure.
I thought so too, but they have a jurisdiction for that. But they also do money laundering or anything to do with like counterfeiting money, right? Has always been the Secret Service.
Good to know. So that's an interesting story. A couple of links in the show notes for that if you want to read about that and see that slideshow. All right, Alan, next story on the...
we had a follow-up with more information about Stuxnet. Wired has a really good article on how digital detectives are deciphering Stuxnet and learning more about it.
Yeah, very good write-up. Definitely worth checking out.
And especially it's got some satellite shots of the nuclear plant
and it ties in super well with our episode from last week, so it's a good follow-up to that. All right, so the next story, and I think, is this the last story in the roundup here, or was that it?
Actually, it looks like you linked the same story twice.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay. Yeah, I did. That's the follow-up. There's a bottom link in the roundup, and that's the follow-up part about the Secret Service. All right, let's move into the Bitcoin Blaster segment.
It's my fault. I stuck my Stuxnet thing in the middle of your thing without realizing.
Right. That's okay. I don't mind if you stick it in the middle, Alan. If that's where it fits, that's where it fits, Alan. Don't worry about it.
All right.
So first up in the Bitcoin Blasters, I want to do a follow-up to my story I shared last week about getting an Atom board and then sticking a Radeon on top of that and then going caseless. So here it is. If you're watching the video version, I'm showing a picture of my caseless Atom board. And you can see my Atom processor has no CPU fan because it runs so low. It's like a dual-core 1.6 gigahertz, and it's just on a mini or a micro ATX, whatever that is. Just sitting right on the shelf. Right now, it's getting about 300 megahashes. I've tried. Nice. I'm experimenting with overclocking and underclocking.
Which card is that?
That's it's a reference 5830 I got from Tiger Direct, and I can get it up to. And right now, it's
300 megahashes.
Yeah, it's 300 and something.
Nice.
And it's running at like 58 degrees Celsius because it's all outside and in the air like that.
Yeah.
Atom board right now running Linux Coin off a live CD. Over the weekend, I'm going to try to transition to a bootable USB thumbstick. One of the things I noticed that was really funny though is after I built the whole system, I got everything all put together, and I went to go power it on, and I realized without a case I had no power button. So I just took out the screwdriver. I'm like, well, let's see if I just bridge these two connectors and see if it turns on. And I held it there, and thought, well, crap. And then it's just as I was about to lift up and give up, it turned on. I was like, oh, sweet.
Well,
so
it's actually when you lift up is what would have made it turn on, right? You have to make the connection.
I guess. Yeah. So, right.
My motherboard, I have a fancy overclocking one. It actually has a button for working on it when it's on a bench. But yeah, you can probably buy something that will do it easily.
My Gigabytes have that, and I didn't even think about it when I went to go use this one. And the last picture I'll share if you're watching the video version. If you're watching the audio version, this is my new setup. I might have shown this last week. I'm not sure, but I wanted to show you the spot where I built my machines that are mining, and then I'm going to put the Atom board on an open shelf there. So it's nice, just out of the way in the garage, kind of minds its own business.
Yep.
Now, a couple last links in the Bitcoin Blaster segment is, you remember hearing about Silk Road, Alan? The kind of one of the things that Wired covered that Gawker or Gizmodo linked to that just sort of made Bitcoin kind of explode. Silk Road was that place where you could buy pretty much anything you want.
Yep.
And the chat room probably remembers Silk Road, but So actually, some Silk Road's still around. It didn't get shut down. You can find it on the Tor network. And somebody wrote up a review of buying some illicit drugs from Silk Road. So put a link to that in the show notes because they bought them with Bitcoins anonymously, and then they get it mailed to them. So it's kind of an interesting story. And then another link just to give a shout out to, and then I think I'll wrap up the Bitcoin Blaster segment, Al, unless there's something you want to call out specifically.
Nope.
PC Perspective this week posted 2 really great articles comparing different GPUs and their total performance to hash to price ratio, all that crap. And then they posted a follow-up story that sort of outlined the different energy costs in the different U.S. states. And then they kind of gave you a breakdown of which cards are probably the most profitable depending on your power rate. And they broke them into groups and things like that. Only applicable to the U.S., but if you are in the U.S. and you want to check that out, a really great chart and kind of helps you
but
place...
the other part of it where it has each card broken down by performance per watt, performance per dollar of the video card, and so on. It's really helpful in picking out which card you're going to use.
Yeah, even if you're not in the U.S., because you can still get the power ratio to performance. And then just a last quick mention, I'm going to put another link at the bottom of the Bitcoin Blaster links for my Bitcoin link roll that I'm doing on Pinboard throughout the week. I just tag stuff for Bitcoin as I find it. If you're hardcore about Bitcoin, you can go subscribe to the RSS feed for that if you want and sort of just see all the links I'm marking throughout the week. Some of them make it into the Blaster segment, some of them don't. And so you get them all if you follow that link in the show notes in the Bit Blaster section. Alan, is that everything we got for this week?
I think so.
What a heck of a show. All right, everyone.
Yes.
Well, TechSNAP is live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv. What was the Eastern time for that, Alan? Do you remember?
It's 4.
4 p.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv if you're on the East Coast.
No, sorry. It'd be 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, 4 p.m. Eastern.
You said 4 p.m. Pacific.
It's time. You know what we need? We need to come up with a new system. Maybe something where a distributed peer-to-peer computer cluster can calculate time on their GPUs, and then
we have universal time, right?
Oh, so it's that's true. You know what?
2000 universal time.
All of us who are on the internet should just transition to UTC and just call it good.
Yes.
Just call it good.
It would be. And do away with, and it would do away with daylight savings time too.
And I am all for that, Alan. I am daylight savings. I am out to get you. That's my it's going to be my internet campaign for 2012. All right, Alan. Well, I think that wraps up this episode of TechSNAP. Yep. Now you can grab a download version just about any format you want, including grabbing one of the RSS feeds to get it automatically over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. And catch every new episode Fridays in the morning. And then send us in an email or go join our links.techsnap.tv subreddit and submit links that way, or even just vote on stuff and leave comments. That's great, too. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for watching this week's episode of TechSNAP. And we'll see you next week.